met his father, Doug Andrew. Now I'm excited to share with you an interview that I did with Emron Andrew, co-author of the book Millionaire by 30. I have to tell you that it creates a new vision of possibility when you can see how someone starting out on their career, if they make a few of the right moves, can literally become a millionaire in their 30s. And that's what we cover in this particular conversation. And personally, I took this interview and this book and sent it directly to my college-age son so he can benefit from this information. And it's not only just for people who are in their 20s looking to be a millionaire by the time they're 30. I learned a lot for me personally from this interview. Well, Emron, I'm excited to have this conversation because I find that the book that you co-authored speaks to what is a really large audience, which is this idea of not waiting till you're old and gray to get wealthy, but the title of a book you co-authored is Millionaire by 30.
Yeah, it was interesting when we wrote the book. I was surprised to find out that most Americans don't really start saving until they're usually over the age of 50, 55 when they start really looking at their finances and understanding how money works and how valuable it really is to start younger. Because I mean, it's really the biggest factor when you look at the compounding and the miracle of compound interest. It's really time. And if you just give yourself just a little bit of extra time. And it's amazing, you know, we even addressed it in the book. One of the first things we address is the fact of getting started early. When somebody gets started early, they can start with 10 times less than somebody who starts even just 15 years later than them and end up with the same amount of money just for retirement alone.
So is the concept of being a millionaire by 30, is that figurative or is that literal? Saying, hey, there's a path to literally becoming a millionaire by 30 for, I don't know if I want to say a typical, 18-year-old, let's say, but when would they start in order to hit that goal of being a millionaire by 30?
Excellent question, Patrick. I mean, it was both definitely figuratively, but also literally. We showed in the book, we showed exactly how you can, the pathway, and it's just one pathway of how to get to a millionaire by 30. Whether starting, usually we looked at about a high school, college grad, so sometime between the age of 18 to 22, and really looking at the different strategies that you can employ to be able to achieve even that millionaire status by age 30, or at least within your 30s.
And it's defined by $1 million net worth, basically, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, at least have $1 million net worth by 30, or at least in your early 30s.
And can you maybe highlight some of the milestones along there or the themes?
Yeah, I mean, when we really look at the overall and the highlight and the real theme of the whole idea or the whole book is the idea that wealth and the creation of wealth and the establishment of becoming, like, say, $1 million. We discovered, and I was taught early on from my dad, that it's not so much the club or the investment vehicle that you choose that's going to create the wealth. It's more in the swing or the strategy. So he would always use an analogy all the time. I mean, if you were to enter into a professional golf tournament, what would you rather have? Somebody like Phil Mickelson or Jason Day, would you rather have their clubs or their swing?
Right.
And it's obvious we'd rather have the swing, because the swing is what's worth the millions and millions of dollars. So one of the biggest things to really hit that millionaire by 30, the first milestone is the mindset. You know, you have to go in and have the correct mindset and start thinking, oh, well, how do millionaires think? What is the mindset I need to have? The seeking for opportunities and seeing opportunities and being able to seek those opportunities. And not only that, but then grab the right mentors and push yourself forward to that goal.
And what is that mindset? So you say you gotta have a millionaire mindset. So is it something more than just the fact that I have a desire? What are some of the elements of that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, with the mindset of a millionaire by 30, I think the first thing comes with what you mentioned there, desire. It's hard to start anywhere without, first and foremost, that. You got to want it. But then once you want it, it really starts to go into now the thinking process, and it's really a possibility thinker. Sometimes it's referred to, and we'll refer to it as an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset. Usually, a lot of times, and we do see it in our society, sometimes in order to feel like to get to $1 million, I can win, and therefore somebody else has to lose. And yet, generally speaking, we find that not to be true. For the masses, it's an abundance. It's the easiest path to hit a millionaire status, especially by 30, is amongst that abundance mindset. It's a win-win situation. And when you can create those win-wins, it can actually catapult you faster because you're bringing other people along with you to that status as well. So it's usually not a journey, a solo journey. People sometimes can do that, but we find it's so much easier when you take it and bring others around you along with you. You achieve it, and it has a lot more meaning, because money's not really what it's all about. It's the millionaire mindset is the fact that it's really not about the money. I mean, that's what you'll really find about, especially millionaires that you seek, that have the difference between a millionaire that has happiness and a millionaire that doesn't really seem to be happy. And you seem to ask them, and you find out it's not about the money. If they've been able to find purpose. So that's the next set of the millionaire mindset, is not only the abundance mentality, but also to have that additional insight that it's not just about the money. There's got to be a greater purpose that you're pursuing there, so that even if the money does come, it's not over.
Right. It's not just a destination. It's a milestone along the way.
Correct.
So let's say that, all right, I got out of school, I'm 22 years old. I got a job, and maybe my job pays me roughly $50,000 a year. I'm going to try to keep my expenses to a minimum, as far as, paying rent and eating and all that kind of stuff. Maybe stay a little bit on the student level of a lifestyle.
Right.
So I have some excess cash flow from that check I get every other week. What do you recommend I do? How do I get on this path to become a millionaire in my 30s?
We referenced, for example, like in Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill really identified one of the first areas of getting wealthy financially, and that is pay yourself first. And you need to understand what that means. So as you get the job, if you're making $50,000, obviously sit down and budget. Whether that's as simply as pulling out the old envelope system, and just putting your money, cash in different envelopes, assign the envelopes to certain things, and to be able to track your money, where it's going. So first and foremost, gain clarity on, well, what's going on with my money? Number two, again, start by paying yourself first. Set aside those savings so you get them going and working for you, even if it's a small number. Again, a lot of people think they've got to wait till they have thousands of dollars to save every month, otherwise it's not really worth it. And no, we disproved that. We showed that if you get started at, say, 2022, just saving $100 a month, if you start saving $100 a month at age 22 versus somebody who waits until they're 35, the 35-year-old, I believe, will have to set aside almost 10 times as much money, $1,000 a month, just to catch up to the 22-year-old at age 60.
So does that reference then this concept of compounding interest and how much impact it truly has?
It does. One of my favorite people in history, Albert Einstein, fairly smart guy, but he stated over and over again that compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe. And if we could really understand compound interest, it could really catapult us. In fact, I don't know if it was him or somebody else would often reference that if the human race really understood compound interest, if we really got it and understood it, we could eradicate poverty off the face of this earth in less than one generation.
And is interest and taxes almost the opposite of compound interest as far as its impact?
Oh man, you bring up an excellent point with taxes. Taxes is kind of it is a destroyer of compound interest, or it is a eroder. For example, we'll look at the simple math. If you take $1 and you double it, you now have $2. Right. Double the 2, you now have $4. Right. Double the 4 goes to 8, 16, 32, 64. You double $1 20 times and you'll end up with $1 million. But if you want to see what taxes do to your growth, if you have to pay taxes on your growth every time you grow your money, well, if you go from $1 to $2, and let's say you assume you just have to pay just 25% in taxes. Well, if you have to pay 25% in tax on your growth, you're going to end up with $1.75. Double the $1.75 and pay tax on just the growth. Double that, tax just the growth. You do that 20 times, and instead of having $1 million, how much do you think you would end up with?
Haven't done the math, but $500,000, $600,000?
That's most people respond with probably about $500,000 to $600,000. When in reality, just at a 25% tax rate, you would only have a little more than $72,000.
Wow, it almost doesn't seem logical, but I'm sure the math is right. So basically, you're saying, hey, double a dollar 20 times with no tax, you got your millionaire.
$1 million. Yep.
With 25% tax, which a lot of people like myself pay much more than 25%, especially between state and federal tax and other such taxes. The difference is $1 million to $72,000.
$72,000. That's a taxed as earned strategy. So if your strategy is taxed as earned, then yeah, it completely erodes away the miracle of compound interest. So a lot of people will get stuck in the short term because the miracle behind compound interest is time. And most of us don't look to the next 10, 15, 20 years. We look at the next 6 months, 3 months, 1, 2, 3 years at the very most. And really, we got to look beyond that to see that miracle of compound interest and what's really going on. And it is flabbergasting. Most people look at it and they have to go do the math themselves just to make sure it is. So you definitely want something that's more either tax-free or tax-deferred. I mean, tax-deferred is better than taxable, and tax-free is even better than tax-deferred.
So now, on the same journey, you've got some money that you're allocating as savings, in your 20s. And what do you do with that little bit of money you're saving?
So as you're saving it, I mean, I would save it in an area. Again, if we're looking at the swing, the strategy, what is the right way to look at? You're going to want to adhere to and make sure you're saving it in a way where we can try to eliminate losses. Warren Buffett states his number one rule to money is don't lose the money, right? And then he follows up with rule number 2 is don't forget rule number 1, right? And so losses have the biggest impact on your money more than gains do. So again, looking at this, if you were to experience if you had a certain amount of money and you went up, you gained 50%, and then you followed it with a 50% loss. But then you gained 50% trying to recover, but then you lost 50%. I mean, if you go up 50, down 50, up 50, down 50, most people will tell you, where are you at now?
Break even.
Yeah, most people say you're broken even. You're not, though. You're less than where you started because of the funny math when it comes to money. Most people are taught, how do you calculate an average in math class? Well, you add them all up and divide by the number. But you can't do that when you're looking at growing your money. It works differently. For example, if you had $100,000 and you gain 50%, you now have
50% gain on 100,000 is going to be 150,000. Yeah.
And then you lose 50% of that. Now, what's half of 150?
You're losing 50% of a bigger number, so you're down underwater. 75,000.
Yeah, you're down at 75,000. Then you gain 50%, but you're only earning 50% on 75,000, so you're up to 112, 250, and then you lose 50%. So you're down at $53,000, whereas most people, they'll look at their financial statements even, and it will say you've got an average return of 0 when your actual return was negative 43.75%.
And so those are different characterizations, right? You have average rate of return, and then you have actual rate of return. And so they try to almost fool you. It's like sleight of hand, the average rate of return.
Yeah, I mean, most people are familiar with average rate of return. Just add them up and divide by the number. It's easy to slide the hand along there and easy for people just to accept it. And the funny thing is most professionals think that that's legitimate.
Right.
And it's not. Whenever you add a negative in there, you have to throw that math out and you have to look at the actual return, not at the average rate of return.
So now, moving on that path further, any other things that that young people should consider, like anything in real estate or anything in any other aspects of investment or wealth accumulation?
Absolutely. So again, along the lines of, just reverting back and finishing that with the losses, and where can I go where I can establish the compound interest and try to eliminate my losses? And that can be done through many different ways. Real estate is a great example. I mean, somebody can get into, a young person can get into a real estate. And in Millionaire by 30, we talk about this. Get into a piece of real estate because there's ways to optimize. When we look at that, we talk about optimizing the assets. And a lot of times people will silo their asset and not look at the entire strategy. The great thing with real estate is that you can really optimize real estate. And you can really do it through a millionaire mindset would be to look and seeing how can I safely create liquidity, safety, rate of return, and then maybe can I also create some tax benefits on top of this as well? And that's really the characteristics of a strong financial swing: liquidity, safety, rate of return, and then finally, what are the tax benefits? If that's the filter I use whenever I look at anything. So if I'm going to look at real estate, for example, I'm going to look and ask myself, well, how do I maintain and establish enough liquidity with this piece of real estate? Meaning, I don't want to put all of my cash into the real estate because then I lack liquidity. I can put some, you might have to have a down payment or something like that to be able to establish the piece of real estate. But if I tie up all my money, I've seen too many people that will jump into real estate, tie up all their money in there. The market may go down or rents may have to go down. They can't cover or they might have vacancies for rents, and they have no access to cash. There's a reason why people always say cash is king. Right. And it doesn't mean you have to have everything liquid. It just means you need to establish and maintain enough liquidity. With that liquidity brings flexibility. There is still an abundance of opportunity in America. And you look at the opportunities in America and around the entire world, and who is it that seems to be the people who always seem to be able to get the opportunities?
People have cash.
People with access to cash. Yeah. And that's why we look at liquidity. You can still own the asset, but don't necessarily tie up all of your liquidity in the asset. So sometimes you look and say, how do we leverage? But if you leverage the asset, maybe through a mortgage or through some type of loan, so you maintain liquidity, you must have discipline. So a lot of times we'll even teach there are ways to create tax-free contributions to your strategy, tax-free growth to your strategy, tax-free access to your strategy, and tax-free distribution or transfer to your strategy.
And this would be maybe like overfunding a life insurance account. Is that one way?
It is. Well, a life insurance account, for example, and I often refer to that as even as Section 101A. Money going into a plan like that does typically have to go in with after-tax dollars up front. So a lot of times I'll try to just show people like 4 phases of retirement planning: a contribution phase, a accumulation phase, a distribution phase, and a transfer phase. When you're looking at this, we'll often look and say, first and foremost, out of the 4 phases, contribution, accumulation, distribution, and transfer, well, what's the most important phase?
Well, all of them, I guess, right?
You would think, yeah, you're going to look at all of them, but if we want to isolate just one, we always attach the question, why? If you want to discover, like, what's the purpose, or ask yourself, why? Why am I saving my money? Why am I growing my money?
Right.
Is it so that someday I can access my money? So if that's the reason why we're doing this, then we want to make sure your distribution phase is as healthy as possible. I mean, if your focus is, no, I'm trying to pass on as much money as possible, then that's the transfer phase. No, all I care about is growing my money. I don't care about accessing or I just want to grow. Well, that would be the accumulation phase. But for most of us, we're saving our money and growing our money so that someday we can enjoy it,
right?
That we can use it. So we want to make the distribution phase as healthy as possible. And the first step to do that is, again, focus and protect, for example, your compound interest. The accumulation phase actually has the biggest impact on your distribution phase.
Right.
So you protect that from taxes and from losses first. Then we look at it and say, do you want to protect the contribution phase or the distribution phase? And maybe the better clarity would be, if you were a farmer and given the choice in the springtime, when you go to buy your seed in the springtime, would you prefer to avoid the tax on the price of the seed and then have to pay taxes on your entire harvest in the fall? Or would you choose to go ahead and pay the tax on the price of the seed in the springtime and thus enjoy your harvest tax-free in the fall?
Which makes a lot more sense, obviously, the latter.
It does. Yeah. And the traditional planning in our country, retirement planning in particular, tells us to do the exact opposite. Protect the seed, and then you got your accumulation also protected, but now we're having to pay it all in the distribution phase, which is the phase we're doing this for. So we look at it like you mentioned, a maximum funded insurance plan is the exact opposite. We'll go ahead and pay it on the seed, and then we can enjoy our growth tax-free, we can access it tax-free, and transfer it tax-free. And then some people ask, well, can I have my cake and eat it too? Can I even get the contribution tax-free? And there is no investment out there that I'm aware of. There is no club or investment that I'm aware of that can give you what I would refer to as 4 green circles. It doesn't exist. or in fact, I sometimes joke, there's no legal investment, right, that can create 4 green circles.
You're not proposing anything illegal, I'm
Correct.
assuming. Okay, good.
But then people often ask, well, why doesn't somebody like a Mitt Romney, for example, not pay more in taxes? Well, it's because him and other millionaires and billionaires are pursuing 4 green circle strategies. It's not an investment. It's combining your swing together. It's all found in your swing. Can you combine different strategies together and effectively create 4 green circles? And you can absolutely do that with real estate. When you incorporate real estate and other strategies together, you can effectively start creating 4 green circles, which can really supercharge your strategies in retirement. But the big thing that I always say, a caveat with that, is that takes discipline.
Right.
The biggest thing, if you're going to pursue that mindset, and that's one of the parts of millionaire mindset, is it's discipline. You've got to maintain financial discipline.
Well, and I have to imagine that's one of the big challenges for younger people. You're in your early 20s. You've got a lot of maybe ambition, but also a lot of appetite for experiences. So it's tough to get that discipline. But I have to also imagine, especially in regard to saying, hey, this is probably the lowest tax you're ever going to pay is when you're starting out.
Yes.
And that if you had just a little discipline to put some money away while you're paying low taxes, pay the tax, and like you said, fund a life insurance account where you can accumulate cash and then be able to get it later tax-free. It sounds like a pretty optimal strategy if you have the discipline to do it.
It is, and it doesn't take a lot. All it is again, setting yourself up front with some type of a commitment. And so we talk about different ways to be able to either, if you're self-innate discipline, fantastic. If not, what are some different strategies to help you create that discipline? And the funny thing is one of the greatest ways to create discipline is through real estate.
Yeah.
Because somebody might buy a piece of real estate, and the one thing they're never going to miss every month
is the payment.
Is the mortgage payment. And so you can create that discipline there. And by using that discipline, you can actually reroute that discipline or reroute that payment and continue to make the payment, but move some of the money back out of the real estate, some of that liquidity back out of the real estate, take jurisdiction of that and put it to work for yourself.
So it sounds like you're just in a quick recap on this, is that, okay, I'm just out of college, I make some amount of money, I have to make sure that I budget so I can put some extra money into an account like is it the proper term, overfunded life insurance, or how do you characterize that?
Yeah, there's lots of different terms for it. We either say overfunded, or I like to refer to it as maximum funded, to make sure it's not just over, it's the max.
Yeah, the max you could put in there, which means that there's some coverage on your life, but when you're 22, that's going to be really cheap. But then the excess cash that's in that account is it's liquid, it's accessible, it's safe, and all those other good things, and interest can compound on it, and you get it out tax-free. So if I'm repeating everything you said, I think I got that right. And now, once I accumulate some money and I can find a way to get into a real estate holding along the path, I want to do that sooner rather than later. I'm sure there's a lot of caveats around that, but just as a general theme. And then at that point, if I do these disciplines, I have an opportunity to maybe become a millionaire by 30 or in my 30s.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, the pathway we showed in the book, for example, is just that. Get your savings established. Get it going, and we did it inside of a maximum funded insurance policy. And as soon as you get some liquidity established, you can access and leverage that liquidity. Access it, and in the book we show going out and picking up a piece of real estate. And in college, we actually even show the young kid still in college, instead of paying rent, why don't we figure out how we can buy and rent your other rooms to your other roommates, so they're paying you rent, and you're getting, you're kind of getting your rent even potentially for free sometimes,
right.
But more importantly, you're also getting the appreciation of the real estate while you're in college.
Smart. So now, let's talk about the undisciplined 20-something that is now 50-something. All right. So
the all too common scenario.
The all too common scenarios you cited. That's painfully common, that people are now thinking, oh my gosh, I started too late. I didn't have the benefit of maybe compounding some interest along the way with a little bit of savings, and now we're in our 50s, and I might have more past than I have future at this point. What am I going to do to try to make up for lost time?
Well, luckily with our society today just living longer and longer and longer, the centurions are the fastest growing section of society today. So 50 is really the new 20, right? I mean, you still got so much time. It's not so much that at 50 we only have 15 years left of our life anymore. At 50 we still have 50 years left of our life. Right. So even at 50, it's never too late. It's never too late because, again, it's all in the swing. You can get started and get going at any age because the principles, when we look at financially and financial success, again, we go back to the swing and go back to the principles. The principles are truth, and they're truth whether you're at 20 years of age or whether you're at 50 years of age or whether you're 70 years of age. And so if you establish your financial strategies or your financial pathway, and if you establish it principle-based, you're going to succeed because it's based on principles and not based off of the roll of the dice. Am I going to get lucky here? Is this going to be the investment that goes big for me?
Right.
Don't leave it to luck. Put it back to the principles. And even at 50, I mean, there's a way to get it turned around, and within 20 years, between 50 to age 70, you're ready. You can retire comfortably.
And I think, so the same principles sound like they would apply as far as no matter what age you're starting. And at 50, you're likely you have more income than you did when you were in your 20s, so that can help make up for lost time if you could be a little bit disciplined on your lifestyle.
Absolutely. Like I said, I mean, again, most young people tend not to get started because they don't think it's worth to get started with just $100 or a couple $100 a month. But if you're not going to get started until you're 50, you're exactly right. Most of the times at age 50, you can start saving the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars a year or whatever it may be. You've got the capacity now to supercharge the contribution phase. Right. So we can supercharge that contribution phase to really then take your accumulation phase from that point to the rest of your life.
Well, let's get out of the abstract and get to the personal. Okay, so we've been kind of abstractly talking about these figurative people in these varying predicaments or opportunities. What's your story personally? So how did it go for you, as far as your trajectory from school into business life?
I started all with family. And with my dad, having him as a mentor and as a coach, kind of hearing some of the things and being around it from a very early age. And in fact, while I was in high school, I enrolled into a program called the Academy of Finance. So it's a college courses and a college pathway you can take and start while you're even in high school. And that really started to wet my whistle a little bit more about the topic of finance and money and entrepreneurship. And it wasn't really until, though, I was about 21. At about 21, I started working a little bit closer, side by side with my father. I also got married at 22. So I got married at 22, and with my new little sweetheart, I really actually initially in the first few months violated my first principle, and that was just out of ease. We rented an apartment. And I think I probably made my dad cringe a little bit by paying rent for a little while rather than just throwing money down the drain. Right. But I tried to get out of that as quickly as possible. So we did rent just to try to be able to be patient, because that's also the first thing I learned also with real estate is be patient. Don't just jump in and get anything. So we rented for a little while we were patient, trying to find the right purchase. And my problem is that I had lived for 2 years prior to that in Japan, came home, I had no job history, I had no credit history. Therefore, how in the world was I supposed to qualify for a loan to buy a house anyway? I mean, I go in to talk to a mortgage company, and they're going, well, who are you? Well, you got to follow all these rules. And so by following all the rules, you typically would think, it's not possible. That's not what my dad taught me, though. Be a possibility thinker. So I think one of my first real ventures was really figuring out how to buy a house with no money down, no credit history, and no long-term job history.
Did you figure that out?
I did.
Wow, you're a hero.
And so one of the first things I had to do is I had to go ask some people that had done it before me.
Right.
Obviously, the first person I asked was my dad, and he talks about within the family taking a withdrawal of intellectual property or intellectual knowledge from the family bank. So I took a withdrawal of intellectual knowledge. I also read up on some other books, different strategies on how to do this, and understood that there wasn't just one simple way to do this. The real key behind it was it's possible, and you've got to be creative. And I started going out, and you can't get discouraged, because the first home I went on, We found it, we loved it. We thought it was the perfect home across the street from the elementary school, great neighborhood. Our hearts are set on it. And the problem is if you start to set your heart on a piece of real estate, you'll do anything you can to get it.
Right.
But trying to do that one with that scenario with that particular seller just didn't work. So I failed at my first attempt. But then I, picked myself back up and immediately go back out again. We found another home just as good, maybe even better. And this time it totally worked. Talked to the sellers, we talked through it on being able to purchase it from them on a contract. So I purchased the first home from them on a contract with no money down. Looked at them and, my first question to them was, well, if I gave you a down payment on the home, what would you do with that money anyway? And their response was, well, you know what, we're really earmarking this money for our daughter's college education. And she's a sophomore in high school right now, so we don't need the money for a couple of years. And I said, so where are you going to put the money? And they said, well, probably in a bank account or CD maybe. And what kind of interest rate are they paying right now? Well, at that time they were even paying 2 or 3.
Right.
So 2 or 3. And I said, well, how would you like 7? And they said, well, where are you going to get 7? And I said, well, in an asset you're really familiar with, right here. Just leave it right here in the house and allow me to pay you the 7%. And so and it really worked. So I had to find where it would be a win-win. It was a win for the sellers and it was a win for me. And that was my first real breakthrough on understanding when you create win-wins, both of us can pursue better financial goals. So that was my starting point. And then jumping into that and pursuing that further with my career with my dad and everything else, and things started to expand and explode from there.
Well, what's interesting in that story, which is telling, is that you had to, as you said, you had to believe in the possibility of it and be creative, right? Because if you said, "Oh, this is all bull, nobody really makes those kinds of deals," then it would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The first deal didn't work out. See, this doesn't really work. That's just all fantasy. But because you actually believe that that deal is out there and you have to just be willing to go through enough no's to get to the yes, you found that deal. And it makes a lot of sense because it's just a matter of what you're after and what the seller's after and having that match up. And they ended up with better interest on their money than they would have gotten otherwise, and you ended up in a house.
Exactly. And that was what felt like the universe responded. When you create that win-win, all of a sudden there was this synergy. And you could now apply that to everywhere else. And so I started applying it in my career, and I applied it in my first partnership, my first entrepreneurial business that I started, and it just started to see things really grow from that standpoint.
Well, Emron, I think, first of all, it's really important that people have this sort of optimism and can-do from the capitalistic perspective, but it's a morally virtued capitalistic perspective of win-win. And the idea of saying, hey, just because you're starting out and you're not making a lot of money doesn't mean you can't aim at these types of things and make them happen. So I think you're a living example of it. Your book certainly lays it out, and you really, I think, contributed a lot of value here by explaining all these experiences with us. So I thank you for that.
Patrick, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share and hope that people can see possibilities in their lives. The opportunities are abundant, and to maintain that abundance mentality as the secret to their success.
That's great. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
With myself and the entire crew that was around me during this interview, even though none of us were in our 20s, what I have to tell you is we got a lot out of this because we certainly have more than 10 or 20 years in front of us to apply this wisdom, and I hope you will.